Since the beginning of MMA, Brazil has been the single most important nation in the history of the sport. The country, originally known for soccer, also happens to have the best MMA fighters in the world. They've got the best strikers like Alex Pereira, as well as the best grapplers like Charles Oliveira. But what is Brazil's secret to consistently producing the best fighters in MMA? Could it be because of the tough childhood many Brazilians face? Well, before we get into it, be sure to subscribe to KO Central MMA, and after watching this video, don't forget to click the like option and add your thoughts in the comment section below. The history of martial arts in Brazil started with capoeira, a martial art tradition brought across the Atlantic Ocean by enslaved Africans. It was uniquely referred to as dance fighting and was a form of both attack and defense. This martial art fueled the slaves' burning desire for freedom across Brazil, and it soon became widely practiced on the plantations as a means of aggressively breaking from slavery. It involves fluid and graceful movements accompanied by clapping and singing. The early forms of capoeira were quite violent, with headbutts and elbow strikes common. After the slave owners caught up, the art became considered a social infirmity and was officially prohibited by the Brazilian Penal Code. The word became a synonym for thief and bandit. However, that did not stop the capoeiristas from practicing. They moved to the borders and camouflaged the martial art as a form of dance. Well, today, capoeira remains a relevant striking martial art, and several Brazilian MMA stars use it for striking. In particular, Michael Pereira, a Brazilian middleweight who consistently dazzled fans with his capoeira display in the octagon. He throws backflips, flying knees, and spinning fists. Even Anderson Silva was a capoeira yellow belt. No wonder he is the greatest striker in UFC history. While capoeira was considered the birth of martial arts in Brazil, the foundation of MMA can be traced to the Gracie family. In 1917, Carlos Gracie learned a hybrid of traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu and Kodokan judo from the traveling Japanese judoka Mitsuyo Maeda. And along with other Gracie brothers, it evolved into the most dominant fighting style on the planet. The Gracie family was famous for organizing the Gracie Challenge, where they would fight other martial artists in Vale Tudo bouts to prove the superiority and efficiency of their own Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Vale Tudo was an unarmed, full-contact combat sport with relatively few rules where martial artists from different fighting styles fought. In Vale Tudo, anything goes. Similar to MMA today, but less restrictive. One of the defining moments in the growth of Vale Tudo came in an epic encounter between BJJ's founder Helio Gracie and the Japanese judoka Masahiko Kimura in 1951. Kimura is widely touted as one of the greatest judoka to ever grace the earth, and was a strong favorite heading into the bout. After 13 minutes, Kimura won the fight by a reverse Udagarami lock, breaking Helio's arm in 2 places in a useless attempt to get the Brazilian to submit. After this disrespectful public loss, the Gracies looked inwards to further evolve their style of jiu-jitsu, adding elements of judo to their budding martial art, and in the process honoring Kimura's triumph by renaming the reverse Udagarami judo lock as Kimura in their style of BJJ. Even though the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu style was popular at the time, there were others like Luta Livre and shoot boxing, which also emerged as a center of Vale Tudo fighting in the 1970s. Vale Tudo was popular in Brazil during the 20th century and eventually evolved into modern MMA. But even several years after MMA took over, Vale Tudo remained a synonym for MMA in Brazil. This gives Brazilians a massive head start in MMA. When the UFC was formed in 1993 by Rorion Gracie and business executive Art Davie, it organized its first tournament, UFC 1. The tournament was an 8-man open-weight single-elimination tournament from fighters representing different martial arts and with barely any rules. The Gracies sent Royce Gracie, who was one of the smallest brothers, to represent the family's fighting style. With the use of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Royce defeated men much bigger than himself. The BJJ master showed everyone what BJJ was and won the first ever UFC event, and BJJ instantly became a martial art that every UFC fighter needed to learn. Royce dominated fighters from boxing, shoot fighting, and karate, and that was the beginning of Brazil's domination in MMA. Considering this, Brazil had better gyms and better coaches, and there were lots of more skilled fighters than anywhere else in the world. Even better, since they had a head start, up-and-coming MMA fighters in the top Brazilian camps trained with the world's best. This cycle has repeated itself for generations, and that's no doubt one of the reasons for the Brazilian domination in MMA. New fighters train with established fighters, and that helps develop their all-around skill. That gap in skill, however, narrowed as everyone started learning about BJJ and several BJJ masters moved to the US. Because of that gap in infrastructure and knowledge, the US and Brazil were able to dominate the early days of the UFC as few people knew how to deal with good wrestling or BJJ. Since BJJ gyms were already scattered all over Brazil, they started to transition to MMA by taking striking and wrestling classes as well as adding other elements of MMA. These worked surprisingly well. After the UFC merged with the WEC, Nova União, one of the most successful BJJ gyms in Brazil, trained former Brazilian champions Renan Barão and Jose Aldo during the prime of their UFC careers. King's MMA has also always been known for hosting talented Brazilian fighters. Lyoto Machida, Wanderlei Silva, Mauricio Rua, and Fabricio Werdum were all trained there. But it doesn't stop there. Brazilians are also popular in striking martial arts like Muay Thai and kickboxing. Gone are the days of BJJ practitioners scooting on their backs around the octagon. Today, most Brazilian fighters are well-rounded and have complemented their grappling with striking martial arts. Anderson Silva was a black belt in BJJ and also had experience in Muay Thai and Capoeira. Also, Jose Aldo is a black belt in BJJ with experience in Muay Thai. Still, BJJ has remained a major tool for almost every Brazilian in the UFC. With the exception of Alex Pereira, the recent Brazilian champions, Alexander Pantoja, Charles Oliveira, and Glover Teixeira, all have a base in jiu-jitsu. But without any doubt, one of the biggest reasons why Brazilians are at the top of such a tough sport is due to the rough childhood many Brazilians face. Combat sports are brutal, and it is common for fighters to attribute their success in fighting to their difficult upbringing. In Brazil, there is no shortage of hardship. Charles Oliveira's nickname refers to his childhood in the favelas. Former middleweight contender Jacare Souza was 15 years old when he witnessed his close friend's murder. He did not start training in martial arts until later in his teenage years. Junior dos Santos grew up poor in Brazil with only a single mother to look after him. He had to start working at an early age, and this deterred him from discovering martial arts until he started practicing jiu-jitsu at 21. Anderson Silva also had an extremely rough upbringing in Brazil. He was a product of a poverty-stricken family and did not even have parents to look after him for most of his childhood. Silva's aunt and uncle were forced to look after him and 4 other kids on a police officer's salary. Jose Aldo also didn't have it easier as he spent his early years in Manaus getting beat up on the streets. This triggered his fighting spirit, and he began practicing capoeira to help his habit of brawling. From there, he tried out jiu-jitsu and became very fond of the martial art. Growing up, many kids in Brazil dream of playing soccer. However, where that fails to be possible, many turn their focus to martial arts. Yeltsin Almeida also dreamed of playing for Vitória, but financial difficulties made him face MMA. By growing up in tough neighborhoods, they learned how to fight. Charles Oliveira had this to say about his childhood. "I always believed and had a lot of faith that any dream I had, I could achieve it. Of course, as with any kid at the time, I just wanted to play football and have a future in that. But sports in general in Brazil are complicated. There aren't many opportunities for everyone, so I knew it would be hard. But I just kept my faith and believed everything would happen the way I wanted." The difficulties built up their fighting spirit, and fighting became a way out of poverty for families. Lastly, it is important to state that with a population of over 200 million people, Brazil is the 6th most populous country in the world. And with MMA being a major sport in the country, it explains why they are very represented. Nonetheless, the United States stands as the only country with better domination in MMA and the UFC. After the US, the second most dominant country in terms of creating UFC champions is Brazil. There have been 16 Brazilian champions so far, and the next country on the list only has 3 champions. Brazilians also hold a slew of records in the sport and make up 20% of the UFC's ranked fighters across its 13 weight divisions. It can be said that the USA dominates in the UFC because the martial arts of boxing and wrestling have proven their relevance in MMA over time, and both arts have deep roots in the United States. There is also the fact that several of the largest organizations in MMA are based in America. As it is, there are 2 Brazilian champions in the UFC. Alex Pereira rules the light heavyweight division, while Alexandre Pantoja dominates the flyweight division. Nonetheless, after the retirement of ex-champions Anderson Silva in 2020 and Amanda Nunes in June 2022, Brazil has lost its 2 most dominant fighters ever. So what does the future hold for Brazilians in MMA? Well, a wave of young Brazilian fighters such as Yalton Almeida, Chao Baralho, and Natalia Silva are looking to make their mark and renew Brazil's dominance. No doubt, Brazil is set to continue with its dominance for years to come.